See, here's the thing, I heckin' love Linux laptops. Especially on touch devices like a Microsoft Surface, for example. I mean, just look at those gestures and animations. I love it. But there are some downsides when it comes to using Linux on desktops. Some being annoying, some being frustrating, and some being just straight up disappointing. So I believe it's best that we cover that topic and figure out how we can improve the current situation. But before we do that, let me quickly remind you that you don't forget to give this video a like if you find it informative or helpful. And while you're at it, why not also subscribe to the channel as well? I appreciate it. Okay, so what are the problems with Linux on laptops or mobile devices in general? After all, most Linux distributions are more lightweight than Windows, which should mean less storage and hardware demands, as well as longer battery life due to less processes going on. I mean, just last week I made a video which showcases exactly that. And yet many on the internet have a, I'm gonna say mixed experience. Starting with high temperatures, poor battery life, connectivity and peripheral issues, to some features straight up not working at all. But why is that? Well, see, here's the thing. Most hardware developers and vendors don't consider a laptop running anything else but Windows. Except Apple, but that's a different story altogether. In terms of functionality, this can result in some issues. For a device to function properly, the operating system needs drivers, and those drivers are often proprietary, which means that their source code is not accessible by anyone but the developer. Given that most drivers are only written for Windows, this is a huge problem, since on Linux you would need to completely reverse engineer everything from the ground up. Now, frankly, on desktops, many issues are already resolved, since many vendors actually do participate in Linux development, or the existing drivers are already so good that they just need to iterate upon the new release. But for mobile devices, oh boy, the story is very different here. On a desktop, you typically don't have that many constraints. You have a big case, some basic necessities and some optional ones. And that's it. On mobile devices, however, we are constrained by size, heat, energy consumption, a ton of sensors and displays, which again need to be fine-tuned. And given the popularity of laptops, has a much faster development pacing and swapping of parts. And this is something that Linux can't always keep up with. Especially when the developers don't actively participate in driver development. Once something is released, they are already busy with the next big thing. Yeah, I know, that's not all of them, but it does affect many, that's for sure. And that's just one of the reasons why we see so many different experiences online. I mean, last year I made a video about installing Fedora on my Surface Pro 7 Plus, and I stated that the battery life on Linux is better than on Windows. And for my office work, that was actually the case. On other Surface devices, however, the story was already different, and even I could replicate some of those problems as soon as I opened the web browser or watched a video for an extended period of time. Battery life then was essentially cut in half. But why is that? Well, of course, because the lack of proper drivers that handle power management. Now, luckily, nowadays there are a few sellers that provide laptops specifically designed with Linux in mind, and they even ship with it. And that's really great, but if someone just wants to try out Linux, it's not really the best approach. Regardless of that, there are solutions out there that can help you to improve Linux battery life. One of the most common ones is TLP, which can utilize and tweak a whole bunch of settings to improve battery life. I currently use TLP on my Surface and it works wonders. I didn't exactly measure it yet, but from a typical charging pattern with Windows, it is similar. Sometimes a bit longer, sometimes a bit less, but it holds around 10 to 11 hours. Another thing that I immediately noticed was that the device ran a lot cooler, since it didn't ramp up clock speeds whenever I did something. And all of that by just installing TLP. I didn't tweak any settings manually. Now, that being said, TLP isn't perfect. For once, it can cause issues with custom kernels and might activate or deactivate devices or features whenever you are booting your PC or get out of sleep. Now, some settings you can tweak, but overall it's definitely not the same than if we had proper support from the hardware vendors themselves. So yeah, battery life is a huge issue, but what about the other things? What about connection problems or missing sensors? Well, especially the first one is pretty hard to fix because it heavily depends on the device. All in all, the newer your device is, the less likely it is to work. But then again, there are exceptions because sometimes someone does contribute some code or just did a good job securing good compatibility. Other times, however, nothing gets published. I mean, since my last Surface video almost a year ago, the camera situation did not change. Now, having no camera doesn't bother me personally, but I do miss some features that I had on Windows. Overall speaking, if your device behaves weird and there is no dedicated effort to bring it to life, then you will have a hard time. But there are some tricks that might still be able to help you. For once, don't just choose a random distribution, but go for something basic like Debian or, okay, I'm gonna say it, even Arch, especially if you have newer devices. Though be prepared to handle some maintenance if needed. Or you can just go for something that is backed by a company that sells Linux laptops. Their operating systems in particular do often have certain optimizations which could resolve many of your issues, most importantly battery life. Or they have an awesome community that points you towards applications that could help. Auto CPU Frag, for example, is a great tool for handling clock speeds, but it also has its limitations. Getting the right information is important. For general debugging, I recommend you to check if you have third-party repos enabled. Some distributions often call them non-free because they are not open source. Then you can use the terminal and type sudo dmesg to identify which drivers might be missing, and you can look them up with your distro's package manager. Now, this of course doesn't always work, but I did find some drivers on older Linux PCs. So what can we do to better the current situation? Well, first off, we need to create a market and show hardware vendors that we want Linux on their devices. I mean, Linux just does a lot of things really well. I really love GNOME's touch gestures, for example. They just feel right. How can we achieve this? Well, it will be hard at first, but we can help by buying Linux-compatible hardware and also upgrade as many devices as we can. See what I did there with the upgrade? Yeah, so let's do it. I really want to keep using Linux on my laptops because it not only gives you the freedom to do whatever you want, but it also never gets boring. I mean, if it does, then I'll just swap distributions or the desktop environment. So many awesome possibilities. If you've liked this video, then please make sure to show it with a like, and why not also subscribe to the channel if you're still here. More videos are already on the way, but in the meantime, you can watch this one next. And all that's left to say now is good morning, good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are. I'll see you around.